The morning Thomas Whitfield lost his job, he sat in his car in the parking lot for 45 minutes, staring at his own hands, wondering how he was going to tell his 6-year-old daughter that Christmas might not come this year. 6 months later, those same hands were covered in flour, kneading dough at 4 in the morning in a bakery he never imagined he would own, a bakery that would one day bring the woman who fired him walking back through his life. If you believe in second chances, in the quiet dignity of people who refuse to give up, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel, because this story is about to remind you that sometimes the worst day of your life is the doorway to the best one. Thomas had worked at Caldwell Foods for 9 years. He started as a warehouse supervisor and worked his way up to operations manager, the kind of steady, reliable man who showed up early and left late, who remembered everyone's birthday, who never once called in sick even when he probably should have. He was proud of that job. It let him buy a small house in Ohio, put braces on his daughter Grace's teeth, and coach her softball team on weekends. His wife had passed away when Grace was 3, a car accident on a rainy October night that Thomas still couldn't talk about without his voice cracking, so the job wasn't just income. It was the thing that let him hold his small family together with both hands. Then came the merger. Caldwell Foods was acquired by a larger corporation, and a new CEO arrived to streamline operations. Her name was Victoria Hale, 34 years old, sharp-suited, cold-eyed, the kind of executive who spoke about restructuring and synergy, like they weren't words that ended in real people losing their homes. Thomas met her exactly once, in a boardroom with fluorescent lighting and a long table that felt more like a courtroom than an office. She didn't ask about his 9 years of service. She didn't ask about Grace. She simply told him, without looking up from her folder, that his position was being eliminated effective immediately, and that security would help him collect his belongings. He remembered the walk to his car more than anything else, the way his coworkers avoided his eyes, the cardboard box with his daughter's crayon drawings taped to the side of his monitor, the specific shade of gray the sky was that afternoon. He remembered thinking, this is it, this is the end of everything I built. The months that followed were the hardest of his life. His severance ran out faster than he expected. He applied to over 60 jobs and heard back from 4. He sold his truck. He sold his late wife's jewelry, piece by piece, telling himself she would have understood, though the guilt sat in his chest like a stone every single time. He and Grace moved out of their house and into a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, where the dryers rumbled through the floor all night, and Grace slept curled against his side because there was only one bed. There was one night, close to the bottom, when Thomas sat at the kitchen table with unpaid bills spread out in front of him like a losing hand of cards, and Grace came out in her pajamas because she couldn't sleep. She didn't ask about the bills. She was too young to understand them. She just climbed into his lap, the way she used to when she was a toddler, and said, "Daddy, you always fix things." He held her and cried quietly into her hair, not because he believed her, but because he desperately wanted to. The turning point came from an unlikely place. Thomas's late wife's aunt, a stubborn, kind-hearted woman named Margaret Sullivan, passed away and left him something he never expected, a small, rundown bakery in a quiet Pennsylvania town called Millbrook, along with just enough money to keep the lights on for a few months. The building was falling apart. The ovens were older than Thomas himself. The sign out front, Sullivan's Bakery, had lost half its letters to time and weather. But it was his. For the first time in almost a year, Thomas had something that couldn't be taken from him in a boardroom. He threw everything he had left into that bakery. He taught himself to bake from library books and late-night videos, burning trays of bread until his hands finally understood the rhythm of it. Grace would sit on a flour sack in the corner after school, doing her homework, occasionally sneaking bites of dough, filling the shop with the sound of a child's laughter that Thomas hadn't heard in far too long. Slowly, painfully, the bakery came back to life. Word spread about the cinnamon rolls that tasted like something your grandmother used to make. A local newspaper wrote a small article about the widowed father rebuilding a piece of the town's history. Regulars started arriving before sunrise just to get a seat by the window. Thomas began to breathe again. He began to believe, cautiously, that maybe Grace was right. Maybe he did fix things. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the bell above the door rang, and Victoria Hale walked in. She looked different than Thomas remembered. Thinner. Tired around the eyes in a way that expensive clothing couldn't quite hide. She didn't recognize him at first, not until he turned around from the register, flour dusting his forearms, and their eyes met. Something in her face changed. A flicker of memory followed immediately by something that looked almost like shame. It turned out Victoria wasn't in Millbrook by coincidence. Caldwell Foods had collapsed less than a year after the merger she engineered, buried under debt, and a corporate scandal that had nothing to do with Thomas or the hundreds of workers she'd let go. She had lost her own position in a boardroom not unlike the one she once used to end his career. She was in town visiting her sister, trying to piece together what came next, and she had walked into Sullivan's bakery simply because she was hungry and the smell of fresh bread had pulled her off the sidewalk. There was a long, heavy silence between them, the kind that carries an entire year of pain in it. Thomas could have said something cruel. He had every right to. Instead, he did something that surprised them both. He pulled out a chair at the small table by the window, the one with the wobbly leg he still hadn't fixed, and told her to sit down, because nobody should have a hard conversation on an empty stomach. He brought her a cup of coffee and a warm cinnamon roll, and for the first time since that boardroom a year earlier, they actually talked, not as CEO and employee, but as two people who had both been humbled by life. Victoria apologized, haltingly at first, then with real weight behind the words, admitting that she had been so focused on numbers and spreadsheets that she had stopped seeing the people behind them, and that losing everything herself had finally taught her what that folder full of names had actually meant. Thomas didn't pretend the pain was erased. It wasn't. But he told her something his late wife used to say, that bitterness was a room he refused to keep the lights on for. He had Grace. He had this bakery. He had built something out of the wreckage of what was taken from him, and that, more than any apology, was what had healed him. Before she left, Victoria asked if the bakery was hiring, half joking, half serious, admitting she wouldn't mind learning to work with her hands for once instead of spreadsheets. Thomas laughed, really laughed, for the first time in front of her, and told her the door was always open to anyone willing to start over. If this story touched your heart even a little, please don't scroll away just yet. Hit like, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that we can survive even when we don't think we can. Before you go, I want you to comment one word below that describes how this story made you feel. I read every single one, and I promise it means more to me than you know. Thomas Whitfield never got an apology in that boardroom a year ago. He didn't need one anymore. He had flour on his hands, his daughter's laughter in his ears, and proof, standing right in front of him, that sometimes the people who knock you down the hardest are the same ones who end up needing you to lift them back up. And in the end, that quiet Pennsylvania bakery didn't just save Thomas Whitfield. It became a place where broken people, no matter who they used to be, could always find a warm seat, a hot cup of coffee, and a second chance.